te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, a worst nightmare. More than 10 residents are still unaccounted for, with at least 6 people dead after the Loafers Lodge fire in Wellington. Some residents had to crawl to safety through dark, smoky corridors. Police are guarding the building overnight, with a slow, methodical scene examination expected to start tomorrow. Checkpoint reporter Jimmy Allingham is in Wellington talking to survivors, and we'll have the latest from the Mayor and officials too. Witnesses say the smoke alarms did not go off automatically and there's no sprinklers in the building. Why, and are the rules fit for purpose? We will ask an expert. Plus the rest of the day's news too. And don't forget, you can watch us live on the RNZ website, Facebook and Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Ahi Madie, good afternoon. I'm Evie Ashton. Police have confirmed 6 people dead so far in a blaze at a Wellington hostel. In a news conference which just wrapped up, the police said they don't yet have a confirmed number of deaths at the Loafers Lodge in the suburb of Newtown early this morning. 11 people remain unaccounted for. Police Acting District Commander Dion Bennett says a scene investigation, which will begin tomorrow before midday, is needed before many questions can be answered. He says it's a large building and the damage is extensive, so they have a lot of work to do.
While we reiterate that we have yet to fully reconcile a list of all of those people who were here last night, who should be here or who were here as visitors, we will not speculate about the number of people who were here and where they have subsequently gone.
Dion Bennett says specialist investigators have been brought in from around the country to help. A Loafers Lodge resident says he's lost everything and doesn't know where he's going to go. Hemi Lewis had lived on the 3rd floor of the building for 4 months. He still had ash on his clothes when he spoke to RNZ outside the Newtown Park Evacuation Centre. Mr Lewis says he heard his neighbours struggling and opened his door to see the fire blazing.
Smoke everywhere, and there was flames coming from the roof. I couldn't breathe. So I hit the floor and I crawled the 3 flights down to the bottom.
Hemi Lewis says he didn't hear a fire alarm, the building had no sprinklers, and by the time he got out, a large portion of the building was gone. Duakaka parents dropping off their children today at a daycare were still visibly upset over the deaths of 2 children in the Northland town. A woman charged with the murder of 2 children has today been granted interim name suppression. One dad, Bucky Lewis, has children aged 3 and 4 years old and says the tragedy is hard to fathom.
It's a little bit eerie here. I think, everybody knows, and without mentioning it, sort of can just be a bit nicer to everyone.
The woman has been remanded in custody without plea and is due to appear next month in the High Court at Whangarei. The Gore District Council has apologised to the community and each other for the turmoil in recent days. A week ago, the Deputy Mayor, Keith Hovell, called on the Mayor, Ben Bell, to resign. That sparked a requisition for an extraordinary meeting to vote on a motion of no confidence in Mr Bell and strip him of his committee assignments. But today, councillors took a conciliatory tone and no one was willing to support either motion. Instead, they sought support from Local Government New Zealand for a review to restore confidence in the council. Ben Bell told the meeting that the request for him to resign was greatly upsetting.
Getting the request to resign was probably 2 of the darkest days of my life. It was incredibly hard, it was incredibly stressful, but following that, the immense pressure from the community and the voice helped lift me up, but consequently pushed all our councillors down.
Ben Bell says the council desperately needs help to move forward. A shop worker in Te Koiti is describing how he rushed to make sure his customers were safe during an aggravated robbery next door. Police say 2 people entered a bank on Rora Street just after midday and demanded cash. The Unichem worker says he quickly locked the doors and told people to get to the back of the store.
I think we were just a bit in shock more so. We were just like, oh, this can't be real. I think it was after the doors opened, the actual shock hit us of what happened. we were all a bit like, oh, this can't be real. This is, is this actually real? Is this actually happening?
No one was injured, and anyone who witnessed the robbery is being asked to get in touch with police. And drivers who flee from the police could have their car taken off them permanently under new proposed legislation. The bill allows police to impound a vehicle for up to 6 months if it fails to stop. If the driver is later convicted, judges will have the power to order their vehicle forfeited altogether. The Justice Minister, Kitty Allen, says dangerous and reckless drivers need to be held to account. The government intends to pass the legislation before the election. To sport now, and France has pulled out of hosting the 2025 Rugby League World Cup, leaving the door open for a potential Trans-Tasman tournament. French organisers cited financial reasons for the withdrawal. New Zealand Rugby League's chief executive, Greg Peters, says it may create an opportunity in Australasia.
Yeah, we're certainly interested in having a look with the Australians, the ARLC, and ourselves, and working also with our Pacific and Indigenous communities on both sides of Tasman to kind of create something that could be really special down this part of the world.
The International Rugby League Board will meet in July to consider other hosting options for the tournament. American Magic is refusing to participate in the second preliminary America's Cup regatta in Saudi Arabia in November, citing security concerns. The team has appealed to the arbitration panel to be allowed to miss the regatta without being penalised. And Taupo International Motorsport Park is emerging as the top contender to be the new home of supercars in New Zealand. Officials visited the circuit to assess if it would be the right fit to replace Pukekohe Park Raceway. The Motorsport Park's CEO, Josie Spillane, says having the racing in Taupo would bring local and international fans.
Had a wonderful home at Pukekohe for a long time, and I think that this would have a lot of people really excited to go and be part of an inaugural event in Taupo.
Organisers have applied to Major Events New Zealand to help bring racing back into the country after it was dropped from the supercars calendar this year. That's the news. Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. Northland and Auckland, mainly fine with isolated showers. Waikato to Kapiti Coast, including Bay of Plenty and the Central Plateau. Isolated afternoon and evening showers today. Cloud increasing tomorrow with a few light showers, mainly in the west, clearing later. Wellington and from Gisborne to Waidadapa. Scattered showers with thunderstorms possible near Hawke's Bay until tonight. Showers clearing from Wellington and Waidadapa by evening and elsewhere tomorrow morning. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury fine with morning frosts. A few spots of rain developing in Canterbury later tomorrow. Bulla to Fiordland, showers, rain with some heavy falls developing in Fiordland this evening and spreading north tomorrow. Thunderstorms possible in Fiordland this evening. Otago and Southland fine at first. A few spots of rain this evening becoming widespread tomorrow, falling as snow above 800 metres. And for Kohu, Chatham Islands, a few showers. The time is 7 minutes past 5. I'll have traffic news and headlines for you around 20 past 5.
Nā mihi Evie, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. It doesn't get worse than this. That from a fire commander at the blaze that's claimed at least 6 lives at Loafers Lodge on Wellington's Adelaide Street. The building appears to have gone up just after midnight. A converted commercial property. It has a bathroom business on the bottom floor and more than 90 residents over 3 stories above. It's home to shift workers, the elderly and deportees, what's been described as a transient population. Residents describe crawling and running for their lives in the pitch-black corridors, a number of elderly among them. Witnesses say the fire alarms did not initially go off, but were manually activated later. Many were alerted by other tenants banging on doors and screaming to get out, with some saying the lodge had previously had multiple false alarms. Firefighters risked their lives to rescue people trapped on the roof, with concerns it could collapse at any second. One person was forced to jump from an upper floor. Emergency services have confirmed people had been on the phone to residents in the building but lost contact with them. Police are expected to start what has been described as a slow, methodical scene examination tomorrow. And while fire and emergency has located 6 bodies inside, they have been unable to search the whole building. Let's go straight to Wellington, where we're joined by our reporter, Jimmy Ellingham. Jimmy, an absolutely terrible day. What is the latest?
It is. As you alluded to, we just heard from emergency services, and police say they expect to enter the lodge sometime about early afternoon, perhaps about midday tomorrow. We also heard about the difficulties emergency services have had getting in there because of the structural or the unsafe nature of that structure at the moment. We've had USAR crews here this afternoon having a look to see what parts of the building are safe and which aren't. We've also seen a drone go up several times. Last night, it's thought there were about 90 people at the lodge at the time. That death toll, 6 confirmed deaths and no more than 10, so we're told. Many residents there managed to escape with their lives. They managed to run out and they were taken to the nearby hospital for treatment, many of them. RNZ understands that some medical students from overseas were among this group. Others were taken to Newtown Park, where a temporary emergency centre was set up. Today they gave residents food, blankets, warm showers, that sort of thing. And our reporter Ashley McCall was there for most of the day and filed this report.
Oh my goodness.
Fire erupting from the top of Loafers Lodge while neighbours and residents helplessly watch from the side. Loud crackling can be heard from the building as flames light up the night sky. The fire alarms didn't go off and had to be manually triggered, but even that didn't startle residents here, who told us the alarms would randomly go off 3 to 5 times a week. Simon Hannafy, who has only lived in the building for 5 months, was luckily awake at the time and had around a minute to alert everyone on his floor.
I wasn't going to leave my room, but I thought, oh well, I'm watching my phone, so I'll go and have a cigarette. Yeah, there was smoke like coming down the stairwell, so I just did a lap around of our floor, knocking on doors, saying, get out, it's a fire, this one's real.
But he, along with others at the hostel, had no time to think and lost everything except for the clothes on their backs. Around 50 people who are now homeless were brought to Newtown Park this morning and were given food, clothes, blankets and other supplies. Talesili arrived to the evacuation site in a taxi on crutches after spraining his ankle when he made a life or death decision.
I was on the top floor and I couldn't go through the hallway because it was just too much smoke, so I jumped out the window. It was just scary. Really scary, but I knew I had to jump out the window or just burn inside the building.
He managed to jump down onto the 2nd floor roof and was rescued by emergency services. Hemi Lewis has lived at the building for 4 months. He heard his neighbours struggling next door and opened his door to see the fire blazing.
Smoke everywhere and there was flames coming from the roof. I couldn't breathe, so I hit the floor and I crawled the 3 flights down to the bottom.
Hemi Lewis was still coughing up soot hours later. Meanwhile, Me'i Matoa Cameron, who has been living there for 3 years with her partner, was woken by a phone call from her friend, not the alarm.
Scary. I was like one of the last ones. Someone rang me, I was asleep. I was one of the last ones to come out. Yeah, everyone was already out on our floor. There was an alarm at 10:30, but I didn't hear any other alarm after that.
The plan next for Me'i Matoa and her partner is to stay with whānau in Wellington, but others are still questioning where they'll go next. Tamrat S.A. Arden is one of them who is wondering his next move and has been left saddened by the fire. He told RNZ the property wasn't run very well.
There is no good management there. It's very bad. People were there. That's why these things happen every time. Smoking coming from on 12th floor. We tell them, lady, there is so many, there is so many criminal people was there. They come to the lady. She don't look after the building.
Well, there's a mixture of emotions, including shock, sadness, and residents trying to remain upbeat. They're also left with many questions, such as how the fire started. Aidan Tavendale, who lived in the lodge for the last 3 years, wants someone held responsible for the loss of their homes.
It's just, I think something needs to be done. I think, honestly, someone needs to be made accountable. I mean, I have no problem with the lady at Loafers. Just need to know what's going to happen in the coming 2 days.
The plan next is to move everyone at Newtown Park into temporary accommodation for the night, including in motels and hotels.
Ashley McCall with that report. We're here with Wellington Mayor Tori Whānau, who got awoken with the terrible news at 4:30 this morning. She's been at the Cordon since about 6:15. Tori, thank you for joining us. It's a dark day for Wellington.
Yeah, it really is. Most of us have been here since the early hours. And of course we found out around about 6:30am that there had indeed been fatalities, which nobody wants. It's the worst outcome. My heart goes out to the families impacted by this. And as I've said, I've been constantly amazed by our fire and emergency service, as well as the police, for doing such a phenomenal job.
What's the council's role in supporting the people, many of whom will have nowhere to live now?
Yeah, of course. So for those that have been displaced, we've offered them an emergency centre where they have access to, food, resources, mental health support, and of course, showers and kai as well. And we're working with central government and MSD to ensure that there's housing available for them as well. We've also set up a mural fund. The council has put in $50,000. Wellington City Mission has raised $12,000, and that money will go towards the families who have lost loved ones, as well as those that have been displaced, just to make sure that they have access to the resources that they need over the wee while.
And Tori, what do you know about the lodge itself?
What we know is that it's available for short to long-term rentals, that those who are housed there are probably on the more vulnerable side, which is what makes this even more heartbreaking. But until, of course, the police are able to get in there and do their review, we don't know a lot about who has been in there.
It did pass the building inspection earlier this year. Is that something the council is going to look into?
Yeah, absolutely. So it did receive a warrant of fitness, and that has been made available. But of course, as part of the review, council is working closely with fire and emergency and the police to do that real thorough check to identify what has happened here.
And you've had a very long day, Tori, but what have you got to do for the rest of the evening and into tomorrow?
I'm basically just on hand here just to make sure that everyone has what they need, offer support to our community. I think when you're a city leader, there is no better way to offer that support than being on the ground. So that's why I'm here. I'll be back tomorrow morning, just so I have my ear to the ground on behalf of council.
And how are you feeling now after this long day?
Oh, fine, because I think when you're in this sort of situation, you kind of just go into a bit of a zone in kind of like leadership mode. So I feel fine, especially in comparison to the crew that worked tirelessly through the night. I can't even imagine how they're feeling and the impact that has had going into that building, saving so many people. They saved so many people. And we have to remind them of that as well, because no doubt they'll be feeling the emotion of what has happened here.
So Wellington City Council to do its bit in supporting the people who need a home, somewhere to live and short-term accommodation. That's Wellington Mayor Tori Whānau.
Thank you, Jimmy, and we'll cross live to Jimmy Ellingham a little later in the program. As he mentioned, it's a diverse population living at that particular lodge. Corrections has confirmed that there were 9 people on community sentences or orders living at the address. 7 people have been accounted for, and staff are continuing to work with FENZ and the police to determine the safety of the remaining 2. They say they've got a team of community corrections staff at the welfare centre providing support. And they've given details. They say of the 7 people accounted for, 2 are subject to extended supervision orders with electronic monitoring. 1 person is subject to an intensive supervision order. The other 4 accounted for were either subject to release conditions or supervision, and staff are working with partner agencies to move those people to suitable accommodation. Let's go to other news now. A woman has been charged with murdering 2 young children in the northern town of Ruakaka. The children were found dead in their home yesterday morning, and the woman accused of killing them appeared in court today. Meanwhile, the community is mourning the deaths of the 2 children. Amy Williams is in Ruakaka.
A pink teddy has been placed outside the daycare centre in Ruakaka where one of the children who died attended. Today, parents dropping off their children were visibly upset. One dad, Bucky Lewis, has children aged 3 and 4 years old and says the tragedy is hard to fathom.
It's a little bit eerie here. I think, everybody knows, and without mentioning it, sort of can just be a bit nicer to everyone.
He says the community is tight and will rally around each other.
I think we'll all come together, a pretty tight little community, everybody knows one another.
Green Bay Educare declined to comment, saying they were naturally devastated and needed time to respond. The news a woman has been charged with the murder of 2 children has hit the small community hard. Long-time resident Phil Paikea leads a domestic violence prevention program. He led a karakia at the daycare yesterday, while another karakia was led at the house where the children were found. Mr Paikea did not know the family, but says relatives contacted him yesterday.
They lived on our street, and I don't know what sort of mental health the person was dealing with, and whether they've been flagged by social services like Oranga Tamariki. I'm not too sure, but I guess as the investigation unfolds, we will probably get to know a little bit more.
Mr Paikea says the family's relatives were deeply distressed.
Oh, look, they were devastated. Absolutely devastated, to say the least.
Although the tragedy has shocked the community, he says Ruakaka is still a place where people can feel at home and safe.
Yeah, it's a safe place, and what happened was an act of an individual, not the community. It's a beautiful community we have here. We're very supportive of anyone that comes into our community.
Phil Paikea says there's an all-welcome gathering in the community now for anyone who needs support.
And that was Amy Williams reporting 21 minutes after 5, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai or whakaara, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time for us to go to the headlines now. Ko Ewe anō tēnei.
The police will station guards at the fire-damaged Loafers Lodge hostel in Wellington before they enter the building tomorrow. Fire and Emergency will hand the building over to them in the morning to begin conducting an examination to determine the cause of the fire overnight and to confirm the total number of deaths. At least 6 bodies have been located but not recovered, while 11 people are unaccounted for. Acting District Commander Dion Bennett says it's a large building and the damage is extensive, so they have a lot of work to do. Specialist investigators have been brought in from around the country to help. And RNZ's Jimmy Ellingham has told Checkpoint that search and rescue crews are on site and a drone has been used throughout the day to try and ascertain the safety of the building. The Gore District Council is moving to try and heal ruptures between the Mayor and Council by seeking independent advice. The Mayor, Ben Bell, had been facing a motion of no confidence at an extraordinary meeting this afternoon after several councillors asked him to resign last week. Instead, no one supported the motion to hold the vote and instead sought support from local government New Zealand to try and find a way forward. And Ruakaka residents are continuing to express shock at the death of 2 children in the small Northland community yesterday. A woman charged with the murder of 2 children has today been granted interim name suppression. She was remanded in custody without plea until her next hearing in early June. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, obviously that fire at Loafers Lodge in Wellington has caused some road disruptions in Newtown. Adelaide Road is currently closed between John Street and the Basin Reserve. And in Gisborne, a truck has rolled, blocking State Highway 2 at Matawai, where the road is now closed. Our next traffic news and headlines is at 5:40.
Ngā mihi, Evie. Let's return to Wellington now and our reporter Jimmy Allingham. Kia ora anō. Jimmy, you've been speaking to people who were in the building when the fire broke out?
That's right. At Newtown Park, a temporary centre has been set up for those who weren't too badly injured or not injured at all. Some of them there told me that they were interviewed by emergency services or police today and actually had trouble recalling the details themselves. They couldn't recall their sequence of events. But one man that I spoke to, who did not want to give his name, had a very detailed account after what happened when he was alerted by a fellow hostel resident. Ash Mayhew lives in a nearby building and said the fire began around midnight.
I came out to get a drink in my kitchen and I thought it was pissing down with rain, but it was actually the smoke. So I ran back to tell my friend and we came out and we just saw heaps of smoke coming out of the building. Lots of people gathered around outside the building and things.
He saw the smoke coming out of one of the windows and decided that, better wake everyone up because the alarm was going and no one was moving. So he went down screaming down all the corridors, and that's when we heard him. And then when he got there, he just started screaming, "Everyone's out, get out, this place is on fire." So when I opened up my door, all I could see was just black smoke. And so I got on the ground and started crawling real fast to get to the door and made it to the door. Yeah, so just made it.
What floor were you on?
Number 3, the main floor, they got burnt down. Yeah, I was on the main floor, lucky. Only took a couple of minutes and our place outside was on fire. So it wasn't a very good thing. No, lost a lot of stuff. But yeah, I'm still alive, that's the main thing.
Were there smoke alarms?
Yep, they were going off. We couldn't hear them. And they went off first, it went off 20 minutes before, and then it went off again when the fire started going right off. And then that's when everyone started screaming. One of the guys was screaming down the corridor, "Get out of your rooms, get out of your rooms. The fire's on." And I just opened up my door and there was just black smoke everywhere, so I just ran for it. Ran for my life and got to the steps and just about flew down there. It's a lot of people in panic. And felt sorry for a few of the other guys, especially the old guys that can't move so fast. These are the ones I was worried about, ones that can't move around, and apparently a few of them are all in hospital, which is bad. It's a bad thing.
You've been at Newtown Park with other people. How are people doing?
Right now, still shaking. Some of them are still pretty stunned, the ladies and that, and a few of the guys, the older guys, I just feel sorry for them, mate, because it was a big rush thing. And the old people can't move as fast as we can, so my mind was just focused on them, trying to think about what's going to happen to them if they can't make it down here. And we got a guy called old fella in hospital at the moment, and we're hoping he's going to pull through this. So we're hoping he's going to get through it. We're all a bit worried about it, so I hope he's going to get through it.
When you got out, was there only one way? There was no fire escape? There was only the main exit, is that right?
The main exit, yeah. Just that main exit was downstairs, going downstairs. I don't know, because I haven't been at the building that long, but didn't see any fire escapes outside or anything, But we made it out of there, most of us anyway. So.
What are you going to do now?
Well, might have to sleep in my car. Might have to sleep in my car for a couple of days until I find somewhere else to go. But we got people in their wins. They're going to help us. They'll help us out, which is a good thing.
The property housed a range of tenants. Some were there for a short stay, some were there for a long stay, and many were transient, which has made it very difficult to find out exactly how many people escaped the blaze last night. Our reporter Somya Bamadipati has more.
The tenants at Loafers Lodge included people on community sentences, Ministry of Social Development clients, as well as health staff. Fire and Emergency Deputy National Commander Brendan Nally told RNZ there were about 100 people in the building at the time of the fire. The firefighter who led the first crew into the burning Newtown building last night says his crew is struggling to deal with the aftermath. Clark Townsley says they were met with extremely challenging conditions as the fire pushed them back.
We encountered extremely challenging conditions. The crews did everything they could to make access to the building. We made good headway. Unfortunately, the fire conditions sort of pushed us back, but certainly there was 110% by everybody who was involved.
Clark Townsley says crews used the only large ladder truck that's on hand in Wellington at the moment to bring down 5 residents who escaped to the roof. Speaking from the scene of the fatal fire, Prime Minister Chris Hipkins thanked the first responders for the incredible work they've been doing, in particular fire and emergency.
And it was clearly a really difficult set of circumstances that they confronted when they got here, and a lot of work over the last few hours to get people out of the building, to stabilise the building, and now a difficult job ahead as they ascertain when they can get back into the building to do the next difficult and tragic part of this process.
Wellington City Council says the Loafers Lodge has a building warrant of fitness issued 2 months ago, and no concerns were raised by the independent inspector. Multiple residents have told RNZ that the smoke alarms were constantly going off, and they were always false alarms. The Housing Minister, Megan Woods, was briefed by officials this morning.
My understanding is there were standalone standalone alarm system in there, and the requirements were all being met, and the building had been inspected as recently as early this year.
Megan Woods says the hostel is not being used for emergency accommodation. Corrections says 9 people on a community sentence or order were living at the lodge, including 2 people subject to extended supervision orders with electronic monitoring, and 1 person subject to an intensive supervision order. The Ministry of Social Development says some of its clients are living at the lodge, and it's working with agencies to rehouse those displaced. Te Whatuora Wellington says it's aware that a number of its staff also reside there. A Wellington City Council spokesperson, Richard McLean, says it's helping to find alternative accommodation.
One of the big challenges we've got is obviously the Loafers Lodge was quite a large accommodation provider in town, so now it's out of action, so that's obviously put pressure on the whole accommodation sector in the city.
Wellington Central MP Grant Robertson says those who escaped the deadly blaze are extremely traumatised. Mr Robertson says when he visited the site where evacuees are being looked after, they immediately asked what he knew about their friends who were unaccounted for. He says many of them are vulnerable and don't have a permanent home.
It's, a group of people who I know, many of them well from my 15 years as the MP here. They're people who work hard every day to get through. For some of them it's a real struggle to get through each day, and this is a devastating incident for anybody, let alone people who are already in pretty vulnerable circumstances.
The Wellington City Missioner, Murray Edridge, says a number of the mission's clients were residents at Loafers Lodge.
Whilst it might not have been a facility that one would choose to live at, it did provide a very necessary service in the city. And so we've got to work out with that loss of capacity, how do we, and we being the community in its entirety, respond to that.
The Chief Coroner says the identification of people who've died in the fire at Loafers Lodge will be a complex and time-consuming process.
Somia Vamadi Party with that report, and I'll be back with more from Wellington after 6. For now, it's back with you, Lisa.
Thank you, Jimmy. Our reporter Jimmy Allingham there at the scene of that fatal fire. A number of you are getting in touch asking about the directors of the company that own the lodge. Well, Checkpoint has tried to contact the directors of the business. I did manage to get through to one who declined to be interviewed. He said he was concentrating on supporting the lodge management at the moment and working on trying to find accommodation for the displaced tenants. And he told me at this stage the police and fire service have control of the building. And so until such time as they have finalised their search of the building and their lines of inquiry are determined, he said he would rather not comment any further. And he also declined to answer any of my questions about the building's conversion or its status as a hostel or residential lodgings. It is 27 minutes to 6. Kia mau tōne mai. Do stay with us. We'll have more from the scene of the fire a little later in the programme. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It is time now for the business news. Ko taku hoa e nāianei, ko Nona Peltier, who joins me in the studio. Nona, the mini earnings season is underway. What can we expect, please?
Yeah, so these are for companies that have a balance date of March 31st. We've already heard from some of the banks with their results, but we've now hearing from other kinds of businesses, property industry. One of the ones that we're going to be looking out for is Ryman Healthcare. That's a retirement village operator. We're going to see how property values are affecting that company. We're also looking at Main Freight. They are a big exporter globally. How's the global supply chain, freight costs, etc. And these are basically numbers we're looking at in terms of economic indicators. What are their profits? Today we also heard from a company that used to be known as Trust Power, but they sold that retail business to Mercury. So we're talking about Manawa Energy. They're a generator. They returned a very strong net profit of $444 million, but that included a gain on the sale of that retail business to Mercury. Underlying profit was $140 million. That's what they're expecting to make again this financial year. They've got some big plans for increasing their renewable energy, so we'll hear a lot more from them. Their company share price dropped 1.6% today, but otherwise, the NZX Top 50 Index, it ended up 8 points to 11,946, and our dollar had a positive tone, better than yesterday, actually. 62.5 US cents, 93.4 Australian, and 49.9 British pence.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite. Nona Peltier there with business news. Now, let's return to the devastating fire in Wellington. Loafers Lodge was home to some deportees from Australia known as 501s. Advocate Philippa Payne joins me now. Kia ora, Philippa. I'm really sorry to hear that some of the people you're supporting have been caught up in this. What can you tell us about the deportees living there?
Kia ora, everyone. Yes, thank you for your condolences. My condolences to New Zealand today and those affected in the tragedy. The people that have been affected there are people that have been long-term and short-term residents that have been removed from Australia. They've now lost every possession they have. They are feeling completely disattached to society and they want to go home.
Can you tell us how many were living in that particular lodge, and do you know what floors they were living on?
I've been told that they were on the top floor, but I don't want to give out information without it being correct through the right channels. I couldn't say how many were there because it's a completely revolving door. Unfortunately, the emergency housing in New Zealand is the location that the majority of deportees are placed in.
And have they told you about their experience?
Through the fire?
Yes.
Fear, overwhelmness, stress, trauma. They're terrified. They want to go home. They want to be with their families.
And so where are they now then? You said they have lost everything. What help are they getting?
Well, that's really changing by the hour too, and it's best to wait till the government says that because, again, I'm only getting information through people and I don't want to give out the wrong information.
So are you confident that they have a roof over their head this evening?
No, I'm not.
And what do you think of that?
I pray that they do. I pray that there's enough services out there helping everyone, and I pray that they're getting supported.
Are you familiar with this building, Philippa?
Not that one in particular, but I'm familiar with lots more around New Zealand, which are very, very similar.
Do you know, or can you tell us a little bit about how the deportees ended up in this building? Is it recommended? What is the connection to this particular property?
It's my understanding that this was an allocated emergency housing provider until recently, but the majority of deportees, when they arrive in New Zealand, they spend a week in a hotel paid by Australian Border Force, and then if they're able to, they get support through PARS or other social service providers, and they get placed in emergency housing and pretty much left there.
Do you have any concerns about this building and its condition? Politicians today have raised the issue of the fact that they're disappointed people are living in accommodation of last resort. What would you say about that?
I'd say that that's become common practice in New Zealand, that as soon as someone's given something that is deemed a house or a room, that they're left to just fend in there and it's all okay by everybody else. We continue to demonise people that are struggling in society by placing names on them like they're criminals or they're addicts or they're people that aren't helping themselves. We demonise them and then we think that that's a justification. That is not okay. There is no justification for people to be left in a housing situation like they were last night. There's no justification to say that that's a standard that we should be accepting in New Zealand. And if we continue to do that, then we are the criminals.
Philippa, thank you for your time this evening. That is Philippa Payne, who is an advocate for deportees from Australia. Let's go to Gore now, where there's been a big back down on a move to express no confidence in the Mayor, Ben Bell. The 24-year-old Mayor and the Council's Chief Executive, Stephen Parry, haven't been speaking for months. The fallout from the fractured relationship led to the Deputy Mayor, Keith Havell, and other councillors to call for Mr Bell to resign. Our Otago Southland reporter, Timothy Brown, was at today's meeting and he joins us now. Timothy, what happened?
Well, what was expected to be the great rebellion of Gore's councillors has, as you put it, ended up being the big back down. Councillors took a conciliatory tone this afternoon with plenty of apologies to go around. One spoke of the fact that in the past 6 months they had dug trenches and today they were coming out of them. And it certainly appears at this stage that armistice has been reached. When it came time to vote on the motion of no confidence in Ben Bell, no councillor was willing to move it, and so it lapsed to rapturous applause from the public gallery. The same for the motion to remove Mr Bell from all of his council committee assignments. Instead of a motion calling for councillors to meet with the local government minister to discuss intervention, they've agreed to ask Local Government New Zealand and Tai Tuara to assist the council with a review to restore the council's confidence. But it was clear that recent days have been bruising for everyone involved, as Ben Bell sums up here.
Getting the request to resign was probably two of the darkest days of my life. It was incredibly hard, it was incredibly stressful. But following that, the immense pressure from the community and the voice helped lift me up, but insequentially pushed all our councillors down. And I believe that they had some of the hardest days of their lives, I would imagine.
So, Timothy, there were expectations of protests outside the council building. Did that happen?
Yes, there were large numbers of people gathered outside the council building. They were there to support Ben Bell in their words, but there were speeches given just before the meeting began where there were plenty of calls for the Chief Executive, Stephen Parry, to resign. That petition that we've been speaking out about throughout the week, calling for Steve Parry to resign, has reached over 4,300 signatures, and it was handed over to the council this afternoon. Among some of Ben Bell's supporters, we saw Clutha Mayor Brian Cadogan and the local Mayor of Southland, Rob Scott.
So what happens now?
Yep, well, that's the great unknown. At the moment, it appears peace has been reached. White flags are being waved. Everyone has apologised for their part in what's led to now. They've apologised to the community. They issued a statement a short time ago that said, "We have agreed that we all need to communicate more openly and effectively so there are no further misunderstandings that could lead to an irreparable breakdown in trust." Strangely enough, the first task the council had to reach collectively following this extraordinary meeting was decide on to whether to build a bridge or not across the Matota River. The decision? Drill a hole under it.
Timothy, thank you for joining us with that update. Timothy Brown there, the ongoing saga of the Gore Council and the standoff with the Mayor. It is 19 minutes away from 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Please get in touch about anything you've heard on the program, homai or whakaaro. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ and the email address checkpoints@rnz.co.nz. It's time for the headlines now. Anea Iwi, mena pitipita kōrero.
Wellington's mayor says the fatal fire overnight at a Wellington hostel was a dark day for the city. At least 6 people are confirmed dead. Police will begin a search of the Loafers Lodge in Newtown tomorrow. Tori Whānau told Checkpoint the council was working hard to house the residents with the support of other agencies. She says the council has started a mayoral fund with $50,000, while Wellington City Mission has raised another $12,000 to go to those who have been displaced. Gore's mayor says the past few days have been the darkest of his life. Ben Bell had been facing a vote of no confidence at an extraordinary meeting this afternoon, following several councillors asking him to resign last week. No one supported the motion to hold the vote. Mr Bell says he's been under immense pressure but buoyed by support from the community since the motion of the vote became public. Drivers who flee from the police could have their car permanently taken off them under new legislation introduced today. The bill allows police to impound a vehicle for up to 6 months if it fails to stop. If the driver is later convicted, judges will have the power to order their vehicle forfeited altogether. Justice Minister Kitty Allen says dangerous and reckless drivers need to be held to account. And the police in Napier will tomorrow begin a detailed scene examination of an address near the centre of the city following an unexplained death there last week. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in Wellington, Adelaide Road is currently closed between John Street and the Basin Reserve because of that tragic fire in Newtown. And near Gisborne, State Highway 2 has just reopened at Matawai after a truck rolled there earlier today. I'll have news and weather for you at 6 o'clock.
Kia ora rā e ho. So, time for some sports now, and security concerns surrounding an America's Cup warm-up regatta in Saudi Arabia has prompted one challenger to refuse to participate. American Magic are opting out of the racing off Jeddah later this year, leaving Team New Zealand and 4 other nations to sail in the second of 3 preliminary regattas. We're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. OK, so American Magic, what are they basing their concerns on?
Well, Jeddah was always going to be a controversial location to have any racing. You might remember even before Barcelona was locked in as the actual match place proper, Jeddah was thrown around as an option for the America's Cup. At that point, there was a lot of people saying, well, would that actually be a sensible option? And it's maybe become a little bit of a compromise, I guess, as one of the preliminary regattas was supposed to be held in Italy, and that has fallen over. So these other 2 preliminary regattas are going to be held in Spain, and the second one. So one in Spain, one in Jeddah, and then one in Spain again. And it's all 6 teams that are wanting to partake in the America's Cup actually have to do these preliminary regattas. They have to sail in all of them. That's part of the rule book. We know that the America's Cup has quite a deep and in-depth rule book, and part of that is that you have to sign up and you have to agree to take part in all of these preliminary regattas. And what we've seen is Radio New Zealand has seen the documents that have actually from American Magic to the arbitration panel around this, and they've outlined terrorist attacks, including a bomb-laden boat attacking an oil tanker anchored at Jeddah's port, and a missile strike which halted Formula One practice at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, as reasons why they don't want to be in Jeddah. They've also kind of outlined that they're concerned about being Americans in America in that part of the world and the way that that is viewed. A lot of I guess there's safety concerns. There's no hiding when you're in the America's Cup racing in a boat that has the American flag on it. You have staff and crew wearing the American uniform. That's quite obvious that you are from America. And they're basing a lot of this on what the US Embassy is saying as well, that they've not encouraging people to travel to that part of the world. And so they're using that, American Magic are using that as a way to say they don't want to go there and they shouldn't be penalised for not going there.
Right.
Because that's out of their control.
So they want dispensation from having to meet that criteria to be at all 3 of the regattas.
Exactly. That's right. They don't want to be seen as not taking part in any way, that they don't want to be, like I say, penalised, fined, points taken off them, anything like that that could be
ruled out entirely.
Exactly. You know, these are the 3 steps towards the America's Cup. It would be raced in a boat that's not the America's Cup boat. It's the smaller AC40, but it's still part of the build-up and obviously, again, part of the rules.
OK, now France has pulled out of hosting the 2025 Rugby League World Cup, citing financial reasons. So, did they give more details and which country's going to step in?
Well, interestingly, France weren't even actually the first choice for the 2025 Rugby League World Cup. It was going to go to North America until that bid sort of fell over. So the French government is saying that they don't reckon that the event would not operate in a deficit. So basically, they set out some criteria for the French Rugby League to meet. French Rugby League says they can't meet that. So they've withdrawn from it and have then sort of given it out. And International Rugby League has said that they'll look in July at some more tournament host options. New Zealand and Australia could be one of those options. New Zealand Rugby League CEO Greg Peters said it would be of interest again to host with Australia like they did in 2017, where it was Australia, New Zealand and Papua New Guinea. They would want to also include sort of the Aboriginal or Indigenous aspects and Pacific Island aspects, expand it out and really give a flavour for this region. The last World Cup was held in England last year, and it's now sort of becoming more clear that there are fewer countries involved in rugby league which are really set up to actually be hosting these types of events. And so it really is either going to be England, Australia or New Zealand that would get this opportunity. And so I guess we'll have to wait until July to find out.
And the pool is small. Thank you, Felicity. That's sports reporter Felicity Reid there. It is 12 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. New Zealand's most deprived children are suffering the most from preventable diseases. That's according to the third report on the state of child health by research charity Cure Kids, released today. Māori, Pacifica and children living in areas with the most poverty are disproportionately affected by respiratory conditions, skin infections, rheumatic diseases and mental health conditions. The researchers behind the report say it is unacceptable, unfair and needs to change. Tom Taylor reports.
The team behind the third State of Child Health report say diseases like rheumatic fever are nothing new, but little has been done to stamp them out in the areas of society that need it most. Professor Stuart Dalziel, Chair of Child Health Research at the University of Auckland, says it's concerning that some of the biggest problems in child health are avoidable.
Over half the admissions into hospital which are covered by this report are preventable.
The report focuses on respiratory conditions, rheumatic fever and heart disease, skin infections and mental health conditions, and it finds that these affect some children much more than others. In the 5 years to 2021, Pacifica children were more than 100 times more likely to be hospitalised with rheumatic fever than European or other ethnicities, while Maori were 40 times more likely. Professor Dalziel says it's not good enough.
It's incredibly frustrating. It makes me incredibly angry that we still have these disparities existing in our country.
Although rheumatic fever and heart disease are most common in low or middle income countries, New Zealand's rates of both are among the highest in the developed world. Cure Kids Chief Executive Francis Suter says New Zealand should be embarrassed that these preventable diseases continue to hospitalise 200 kids a year on average.
What I get disappointed about is we can eradicate COVID and limit it, but we've got rheumatic fever and rheumatic heart disease in this country, which is a third world disease, and because it's a small group of people that are impacted by it, it doesn't get the same momentum.
While many childhood vaccinations are free, researchers say that doesn't necessarily translate into kids getting vaccinated, with other barriers standing in the way, such as a lack of transport. Dr. Terry Ann Clark says it's a similar story with mental health services. Just because they exist doesn't mean they're reaching who they need to.
Families can't get services, there are huge wait times. So, there is a huge service mismatch between service, delivery and the need that's happening out there in the community.
Dr. Clark says mental health services aren't fit for purpose, often aren't available when kids need them, and on top of that, there's innate discrimination within the health system.
Māori are less likely to be able to access care. When they do access care, they are less likely to be taken seriously. When they do get taken seriously, they are less likely to be referred onto mental health services and less likely to receive quality care.
The researchers say a collaborative effort between themselves, the government and health workers is what's needed to make a difference. And with the new budget coming on Thursday, they're hoping to see a greater priority placed on child health, an investment they say will pay off many times over.
And that report was from Tom Taylor. Let's get to some of your feedback now. And one of our listeners, Richard, has got in touch about the situation with Mayor Ben Bell and the standoff with a number of councillors in Gore. Richard says, this afternoon, I watched Mayor Bell calmly face down his opponents with grace and aplomb. And in their silence, his opponents revealed themselves as cowardly bullies. I'm a pensioner myself, and if our children are to have a future, we need to be electing young people of the calibre of Mayor Bell, of Chloe Swarbrick and Greta Thunberg. It is time for the tired old business interests to step down. My generation has created the problems. The young people must now be given the space to address them. That from Richard. Thank you for your email. On the subject of the fire at Loafers Lodge in Wellington, terrible tragedy there and at least 6 bodies located. This person says that we haven't heard anything from the owner of the hostel. Well, we did try and contact them. They didn't want to give an interview. They said they were concentrating on relocating the tenants who will need other accommodation. And until the police release the scene, they are reluctant to speak. Another person, Janet from Christchurch, is asking, Loafers Lodge received a warrant of fitness. Why on earth were the lack of sprinklers not highlighted? A hotel needs to provide them. No difference, reckons Janet from Christchurch. Well, Janet, stay tuned. After 6, we're going to speak to a fire protection expert who will explain the rules about what kind of fire prevention and fire warning systems are required in these residential lodges, and you may be surprised. That is after 6. A former tenant of Loafers Lodge says fire drills and alarms were a regular occurrence, but it was up to residents to decide whether to evacuate in the evenings because there was no overnight security manager. Kent Stevens told our reporter Luca Foreman, whilst residents were separated on different floors for security reasons, there was always a way out.
Kent Stevens called Loafers Lodge home for 10 years before he moved out 6 months ago. This morning's tragedy came as a shock.
I was very surprised because I'd just woken up and I was looking at the news and my old property had been engulfed in flames, and it was like a leading news article.
He says the lodge accommodated a mixture of tenants, from hospital shift workers to people who had nowhere else to live. He says each floor remained separate for security reasons, but there was strip lighting in the hallways so residents could leave easily at night in an emergency.
So if there was a fire, you would just go to the nearest 2 exits, and then you just press a button, and then you can open the door and then go down the stairwell down to the ground floor. So in terms of the floors are kind of kept separate for security reasons, so one person can't be on the wrong floor.
Kent says the fire alarm would go off around once a month, usually because someone had burnt toast. He says there was no overnight on-site manager, so if the alarm went off at night, it was up to residents to evacuate.
So some people would be evacuating, other people would be thinking of it as cry wolf or something like that. So they're used to the alarm going off because maybe someone's been cooking when they shouldn't have been and set the alarm off, and so they might be staying in their room when they should really be exiting.
Kent says he spent the day reassuring friends he no longer lives at Loafers Lodge.
I was on another level. I wasn't on the top floor. The photographs suggest the fire was really at the top of the roof there, and I was fairly far away from that. So I'm hoping that the people that I knew, they were a distance from the fire and they managed to evacuate. And the people that I knew, I think they're pretty onto it. They would typically evacuate when there was a fire alarm, so I think that they would be all right. The actual fire alarm, assuming that it was working properly, is quite loud, and it's telling you to get out of the building now. So you really have to be strongly ignoring a warning for not to exit the building.
He says he hopes all his friends made it out safely.
I send out my sympathies for all the people affected. I'm incredibly thankful for not being caught up in that situation. Yeah, it's just in some ways pure luck that I'm not physically affected, that I'm not out on the streets or trying to find new accommodation, that my stuff hasn't been trashed, that I'm okay.
Meanwhile, political leaders addressed Parliament this afternoon, acknowledging the loss of life, those left displaced, and the dedicated work of police, fire and medical staff at the tragic scene.
At its peak, there were 29 fire crews involved, with more than 80 firefighters from all over Wellington. Fire crews rescued 5 people off the roof using a specialist aerial appliance. They helped to save many, many lives.
Offering our thoughts, prayers and sympathies to those who have perished in this dreadful disaster.
What kind of country are we that we allow this kind of thing to happen to our most vulnerable members of our community?
To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to love, and a time to hate. At this time, we wrap our supports and aroha around those who are affected. There will be a time for answers, and we will respond.
And if you are just joining us, at least 6 people are confirmed dead, with 11 unaccounted for tonight after a fire at a Wellington hostel overnight. Now, the Loafers Lodge hostel on Adelaide Road in Newton went out just after midnight. The property has a business on the bottom floor, but more than 90 tenants reside on the 3 stories above. It is home to shift workers and the elderly, as well as transients from former prisoners and deportees to homeless people unable to find permanent accommodation. Former tenants have told Checkpoint the fire alarms went off regularly and there was no overnight manager. They told us tenants were separated by floor for security reasons, and residents say they crawled and ran for their lives in pitch black corridors around midnight. Witnesses have described thick smoke for around an hour, and they say the fire alarms did not initially go off but were manually activated later. Many were alerted by other tenants who were banging on the doors and screaming for them to get out of the building, saying that this was real. Now, firefighters risked their lives to rescue people. 5 people were trapped on the roof with concerns it could collapse, and 1 person was injured after jumping to safety from an upper floor. A total of 52 people were rescued from the building, and emergency services have confirmed people had been on the phone to residents in the building but lost contact with them. Police are expected to start what is being described as a slow, methodical scene examination, and that should start around mid-morning tomorrow. And while Fire and Emergency has located 6 bodies inside, they have been unable to search the whole building. Checkpoint has approached the owners of the Loafers Lodge and they declined to be interviewed. We're going to have more on this after the news.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Ngā mihi o te pō. Good evening. Ko Evie Ashton tēnei. Fire and Emergency says it's located 6 bodies so far after the fire in a Wellington hostel overnight. Earlier, police said 11 people remained unaccounted for after the fire at Loafers Lodge in the suburb of Newtown. FENZ's Assistant National Commander, Bruce Stubbs, says there's significant damage to the building and a lot of debris.
At this stage, we have 6 people inside. There is extensive damage within the building, and we have been unable to search all areas. There's a significant amount of debris from the roof collapse, but at this stage we've located 6 people.
The police say they still haven't fully reconciled the list of everyone who was at the hostel last night. The Acting District Commander, Dion Bennett, says a scene investigation, which will begin tomorrow morning, is needed before many questions can be answered. Police guards will remain on site overnight. A resident of the hostel has described running for his life after black smoke engulfed the building. The man, who's lived on the top floor for 9 months, says he was alerted after a fire alarm began ringing.
And that's when everyone started screaming. One of the guys was screaming down the corridor, "Get out of your rooms, get out of your rooms. The fire's on." And I just opened up my door and there was just black smoke everywhere, so I just ran for it. Ran for my life and got to the steps and just about flew down there.
The man says many fellow tenants who escaped the building have been left stunned. Wellington's mayor says thousands of dollars have already been raised to support those affected by the inferno. Tory Whānau told Checkpoint the council is giving support wherever it can, including through a dedicated mayoral relief fund.
The council has put in $50,000. Wellington City Mission has raised $12,000, and that money will go towards the families who have lost loved ones, as well as those that have been displaced, just to make sure that they have access to the resources that they need over the wee while.
Tory Whānau says Loafers Lodge was home to people on the more vulnerable side, which makes the situation even more heartbreaking. Wellington City Council says there are 8 residents from the hostel still at the emergency centre at Newtown Park. It says 50 residents arrived at the emergency centre after the fire. Council, welfare staff and other agencies have found them temporary accommodation in local motels, hotels and hostels. Others are staying with family or friends. A council spokesperson says plans to find long-term accommodation for the hostel residents are underway. Meanwhile, a cordon remains in place at both ends of Adelaide Road, which is expected to remain closed overnight and tomorrow morning. Adelaide Road is a main arterial road connecting Newtown and the central city, and traffic is backing up on alternative routes. Waka Kotahi says commuters and people heading to and from the airport and the hospital should allow for extra travel time. The Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, has come under heavy fire hours after President Zelensky finished a European tour in which he was promised billions of dollars worth of military aid. The BBC's Hugo Bartrega reports from Kyiv.
It was the 8th time the capital had come under attack this month. Here, the air raid alert sounded at around 2:30 in the morning and was lifted only 2 hours later. Officials described it as an intense attack that was carried out with drones, cruise and probably ballistic missiles. They said most of them were shot down by the military. Several loud explosions were heard as the air defense systems repelled the attack. The mayor said falling debris was reported in 4 districts of the city and that at least 3 people had been injured.
The Gore District Council has apologised to the community and to each other for the turmoil in recent days. A week ago, the Deputy Mayor, Keith Hovell, called on the Mayor to resign, which sparked an extraordinary meeting for the Council to vote on a motion of no confidence in Ben Bell. However, today, councillors took a conciliatory tone and no one supported the motion. Before the vote, Keith Hovell told the meeting that he's witnessed bad behaviour recently and has to call that out.
So it is time to speak out. Others in the press have said stop behaving like children. I would say the opposite. Our mental and physical health is at risk. What do you want us to do? Pretend all is well and carry on? That is no longer the New Zealand way.
The Gore District councillors voted to seek support from local government New Zealand for a review to restore confidence in the council. Auckland Council says it's unclear just how many staff will be affected by staff reductions. The council is hoping to plug its $325 million budget shortfall with a proposed budget to be adopted by the end of next month. It announced in April changes that would see the organisation become what it calls leaner and more sharply focused. A decision is expected to be communicated to council staff later this week, along with a revised proposal for changes. Donald Trump's former lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, is being sued for alleged sexual assault and harassment by a former associate in New York. Noelle Dunphy, who began working for Mr. Giuliani in early 2019, alleges the former mayor of New York demanded sexual favours. Mr. Giuliani denies the allegations and says he'll defend against them. And Hawke's Bay's National Aquarium has released its 2 remaining sharks into the ocean. The 2.2-metre broadnose 7-gill shark and a 1.2-metre school shark are both species found locally. The aquarium's general manager, Rachel Hayden, says the sharks were continuously grazing their noses in the tank. When strategies to completely prevent the injury didn't work, she says aquarium staff decided releasing them was the best option. That's the news.
Kia ora, I'm Mihingarangi Forbes, host of Mata, RNZ's Māori political podcast, where commentators, newsmakers and politicians wānanga the big issues this election year.
Would you consider a coalition with the National Party?
Holy hikama, they'd have to pretty much have surgical transformation.
Nō reira, ariari taringa mai kia Mata with Mihingarangi Forbes after the 6:30 headlines. Tonight on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. Northland and Auckland, mainly fine with isolated showers. From Waikato to Kapiti Coast, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central Plateau. Isolated showers this evening, cloud increasing tomorrow with a few light showers, mainly in the west, clearing later. Gisborne to Wairarapa, scattered showers with thunderstorms possible near Hawke's Bay until tonight. Showers clearing from Wairarapa early in the evening and elsewhere tomorrow morning. Wellington, Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine with morning frosts. A few spots of rain developing in Canterbury later tomorrow. Buller to Fiordland, showers, rain with some heavy falls in Fiordland, spreading north tomorrow. Thunderstorms are possible in Fiordland this evening. Otago and Southland, fine at first. A few spots of rain this evening, becoming widespread tomorrow, falling as snow above 800 metres. And for Chatham Islands, a few showers. It's coming up to 8 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Ngā mihi, Evie. No mai, hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. There's no sprinkler system in the Loafers Lodge that has 3 residential floors and more than 90 residents. Witnesses say the fire alarms didn't go off automatically and residents ran down the corridors banging on doors, telling people to get out, and the fire was real. Wellington City Council says the lodge has a building warrant of fitness that was issued in March this year, and there were no concerns raised by the independently qualified person who inspected and tested the life safety systems in the building. But here's what Fire and Emergency Deputy National Commander Brendan Nally had to say on the issue of sprinklers.
If this building had a fully sprinkled working sprinkler in here, then the result will be way less than what we're dealing with now. I'll tell you that straight up. My firefighters, the great ComSen operators, wouldn't have had to go through the tragedy. We wouldn't have people that are deceased. We wouldn't have families that are missing loved ones. We wouldn't have people that are worried that they can't find people. All that tragedy, all that human tragedy wouldn't be here if this building was fully sprinkled with an operable system.
So why no sprinklers with such a high number of residents over multiple floors, a number of them elderly? Well, joining us now is Chris Mack from the Fire Protection Association of New Zealand. Kia ora, Chris. A lot of our listeners are confused by this. Me too. Can you please explain what the sprinkler rules are for buildings?
Well, basically, kia ora, basically under our building code, there's various ways to comply with it. But in the simplest way, hotels and apartment buildings with an escape height greater than about 25 metres, 7 or 8 floors, would require a sprinkler system. Lower buildings, such as hotels, most hotels up to, with an escape height of 10 metres, would require a smoke detection system.
So 10 metres, how many stories are we talking there?
That's 3.
Right. So a building of this size, 1 commercial floor and 3 residential, not compulsory for it to have a sprinkler system, as you understand it.
That's correct.
What do you think of that?
Frankly, I wouldn't stay in a hotel of that type unless it had a sprinkler system. The majority of modern hotels do have sprinkler systems, and I'm in the business of fire protection, life safety. I would stay in a sprinkler protected hotel.
So no sprinkler system and 3 residential floors, 4 in total, counting the bottom floor. What hazards does that create?
Well, basically, if there is an uncontrolled fire and people are not warned of the fire and evacuate early enough, unfortunately what happened today would happen.
So do you think the rules are fit for purpose?
This is not a modern building. The rules are always evolving and changing, and we're learning from usually minor incidents and issues on how we can improve life safety in a building. But, I'm not sure of this building. I haven't got the details about this building, but it's not a modern building. If it was a modern building, it would have, quite possibly, it would have sprinklers. It would have a minimum of a smoke detection system designed to avoid false alarms, and things like passive fire protection to stop fire spreading through the building, smoke control to stop the fire spreading through the building. So the rules today are probably fit for purpose. When this building was built, they may not have been fit for purpose.
Right, so depending on the age, the requirements are different, which raises the issue, what about if you significantly modify a building? What happens if its use was commercial and then you convert it to a residential accommodation facility? How do the rules change then?
If a building is altered, extended or change of use, you need to comply to today's standard, and the standard with a small s, to today's rules on as nearly as reasonably practical basis. What you have to do is consider the benefits of complying with today's standards against the sacrifices, which is usually costs.
So if a building went from a commercial classification to a residential classification, in the year that shift happened, you would have to comply with modern fire safety requirements as is practicable.
As reasonably practicable, yes.
Okay. So does it surprise you then that this building doesn't seem to have had modern adjustments made to it?
I'm not sure when this building. I know very little about this building. I'm not sure when the change, when the change to a boarding house occurred. So I'm not sure what the situation was when it was converted into a boarding house.
Understand. Now, you mentioned something that is interesting, the smoke alarms, right? So a number of the residents have said that there was always false alarms in this building. Are there systems that guard against that? Because obviously, false alarms can lead to complacency.
Yes, and that's correct. A number of years ago, the type of smoke alarm system for a building such as this has changed. Under the modern code, you would have local smoke alarms in each unit or each hotel room, which would alert the occupants of that room to a fire inside that room. And then you would have a smoke alarm system in the public areas, the corridors, etc., that would evacuate the whole building. The idea is that if somebody's in a room, the smoke alarm goes off, they would wake up or look up. If there is a fire, they would evacuate, and as the smoke drifted into the main corridors, the whole building would be evacuated.
Really appreciate your time, Chris. Thank you for joining us. That is Chris Mack from the Fire Protection Association of New Zealand. Hope that clarifies your questions on sprinklers. Now, let's head back to Wellington now and our reporter, Jimmy Allingham. Kia ora, Jimmy. There's a lot of shock in the community down there, isn't there?
Kia ora. There is definitely a lot of shock in the community. The lodge was located in quite a densely populated part of Wellington. It's quite close to the central city. There are a lot of students around. There's also a lot of apartments overlooking the lodge, and many people told me that they were watching on helpless as the fire broke out. I spoke to a couple this afternoon, and here's what they've got to say. Ash Mayhew lives in a nearby building and said the fire began around midnight.
I came out to get a drink in my kitchen and I thought it was pissing down with rain, but it was actually the smoke. So I ran back to tell my friend and we came out and we just saw heaps of smoke coming out of the building. Lots of people gathered around outside the building and things. It was pretty gnarly. Like, there was smoke everywhere. So, and I know one of the guys in the building, so hopefully he's all right. He's an older guy. I know there's a lot of different people that live in that building, so yeah, hopefully they're all right.
He says he was shocked about how quickly the tragedy unfolded.
At first it was just a lot of smoke and a lot of noise from people and stuff like that, and then as the firemen tried to get into the building, that's when they started breaking windows and stuff like that, and then probably half an hour later the fire just got out of control and you could hear, cans of deodorant exploding, things like that. A few yells and stuff. But yeah, it's pretty nuts. And I know that there's no sprinklers in that building either, so I mean, yeah, really terrible.
Alex Malcolm and Millie Coots live behind Loafers Lodge. They don't know anyone in the building but walk under it regularly as a shortcut.
It's really, really, really scary because you normally just see and hear of these things, but in such close proximity, and just looking over and you just couldn't do anything, and being told.
It's so dramatic, and hearing all the fatalities as well, it's so sad.
Oh my God.
Alex and Millie watched in horror as the fire unfolded. They say there were still residents on the lower level of the hostel an hour after the fire started.
Woke me up around 12-ish, and we kind of heard some yelling and the sirens, and then it's normally pretty loud around here, so we didn't really think too much of it till we looked outside, and then we saw the smoke, and
just a big black kind of thick of like smoke, and then probably 10 minutes after that we saw the what would you even call it, like flames coming through the ceiling. It was just so surreal, it was just like nothing really seen before, and you couldn't see anything.
Yeah.
It was just so thick.
Yeah,
and
it was crazy.
It was literally nothing that I've really seen before, especially so close.
Could you see any of the people who lived in the lodge?
There was an hour where there was kind of just smoke and you couldn't see any flames or anything, and then there were people being evacuated and stuff. It was kind of right at the beginning. Yeah. And there was some people still on the lower balconies kind of just looking out.
Ash Mayhew says he's never been inside Loafers Lodge, but the residents are good people.
I just hope all the people that were involved are okay, and that's all I can really say on that.
Yeah, so neighbours there describing their feelings of helplessness as that broke out. But we have heard today that many agencies, Wellington City Council, government departments and the Wellington City Mission are helping residents displaced by the fire at Loafers Lodge, so they have somewhere to go tonight, something to eat, somewhere to have a warm shower, maybe even a change of clothes. At Adelaide Road at Loafers Lodge, there's still plenty of emergency services here. The road is still shut, and it looks like that those emergency service workers will be working here into the night. Back to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Jimmy. That is our reporter Jimmy Allingham at the scene of that fatal fire in Wellington at Loafers Lodge. At least 6 bodies have been found inside the building. The police forensic team hope to enter the building tomorrow and start examining the site. They will be guarding the building with fire and emergency services overnight. It is 19 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. To the UK now, where Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky greeted British Prime Minister with a hug on his surprise visit to London overnight. Mr. Zelensky secured fresh promises of military aid to fight Russia's invasion. It was the latest stop on his tour of European capitals. On Sunday, Germany's leader Olaf Scholz announced a defence weapons package. In Paris, President Macron has promised more light tanks and armoured fighting vehicles. Britain will send hundreds of attack drones, but has stopped short of sending jets. It comes as Ukraine reports Russian forces are no longer capable of large-scale offensive actions on the ground. The BBC's Caroline Hawley reports.
The last stop in a whirlwind tour. His visit here only announced this morning. President Zelensky arrived at Chequers fresh from talks in Europe. His mission, to get from the West the weaponry he needs to fight back against Russia. It's his second trip to the UK this year. He came, he said, for substantive negotiations.
You are actually the first foreign leader that I've had the privilege of welcoming here as Prime Minister.
It's a privilege to be here. Yes, the first time. You said not the last.
Definitely not the last.
So we, of course, we'll discuss very important issues, urgent support for Ukraine and security for, I think, not only for Ukraine, it's important for all the Europe. So thank you.
The UK is the biggest donor of military aid to Ukraine after the United States. Last week it announced it had given these Storm Shadow missiles, which have a range of up to 150 miles, much longer than anything it had before. Today, the government promised hundreds more air defence missiles, as well as hundreds of new long-range attack drones. It's already promised or given Ukraine arms and equipment worth close to £5 billion and trained more than 15,000 Ukrainian troops last year. The Kremlin said it took an extremely negative view of the latest UK support, but that it wouldn't change the course of the conflict. To turn the tide in Ukraine's favour, President Zelensky says he still wants Western warplanes and what he calls a coalition of jets. From the Prime Minister, no commitment, no plans for that.
Not a straightforward thing, as Vladimir and I have been discussing, to build up that fighter combat aircraft capability. It's not just the provision of planes, it's also the training of pilots and all the logistics to go alongside that.
Today we spoke about the jets, very important topic for us, because we can't control the sky, you know it.
President Zelensky has been busy as Ukraine prepares a long-awaited counter-offensive against Russia, shaking a lot of hands, not only in France, but Germany too, and in Rome, rallying support wherever he can get it. But Ukraine, he said today, still needs more time. Every day, the war that Russia started causes more casualties, these soldiers wounded in Bakhmut. More lives will be lost in the Ukrainian counter-offensive when it comes. But its outcome will have implications not only in Ukraine, but far beyond.
Thailand has seen what's been called as a political earthquake, with two main opposition parties winning the general election. It's an astonishing rejection of the military-backed parties that have ruled for almost a decade. Thousands of people gathered on the streets, others stood on rooftops, many of them dressed in the signature orange colour of the reformist Move Forward party. The BBC's Jonathan Head is in Bangkok.
Stunned by their success, Thailand's youngest and most progressive party came to celebrate at the place they call Democracy Monument. Built to commemorate a democracy that many Thais say they have never had. Today we have politics driven by hope in this country, they were told by Rangsaman Rome, an MP who, like so many in the party, has spent time in jail for his political views. Move Forward caught the public's imagination with the boldness and clarity of its manifesto.
It's a new era. It's a new era.
You look very happy.
Yes, I'm starting to cry when I see him.
We stay all night watching all the election. Yeah.
This is a moment of elation for supporters of a party that probably never expected to get this close to being at the heart of government. But some very tough days lie ahead. It's not even clear that despite the mandate this party's got, that they will be allowed to take office. Party leader Peter Limjaroenrat was quick to claim victory and to reach out to like-minded parties for what he hopes will be a reformist coalition government.
The sentiment of the era has changed, and it's right. It was the right timing that people have been through enough of lost decade. And today is a new day, and hopefully it's full of bright sunshine of hope.
But his path to power could yet be blocked by Conservative opposition in the unelected Senate or by the Election Commission or the courts, which in the past have been used to depose elected governments.
In other countries, when you have the largest two parties like this combined with more than half of the lower chamber, you should be able to form a government. But in Thailand, it's up to the referee agencies, and the referee agencies have shown themselves not to be impartial. So I'm sure that they will concoct something. It will be surprising if it becomes straightforward.
There will be many days of uncertainty ahead in Thailand as its people wait to see whether they get the government that so many voted for or whether they end up with something else.
A teacher in the US state of Florida is being investigated after showing her 5th grade class a Disney film. The movie, Strange World, is a heartwarming animated story which features a gay teen romance. It's rated PG. It comes after the controversial legislation signed by Governor Ron DeSantis last year that bans teachers from discussing sexual orientation or gender identity in the classroom. CNN's Isabel Rosales reports.
First-year Florida teacher Jenna Barbie is under fire for showing her 5th grade class a Disney movie, Strange World.
Hey, Diazo. I didn't see you there.
Her intent, she says, was to teach the class about the environment. The film features a family of explorers banding together to navigate the world.
So I thought that was such a beautiful message to send to my kids, along with working together, chasing your dreams, compassion.
Instead, it led to the ire of a school board member, Shannon Rodriguez, also a parent of one of Barbie's students.
I'm not going to stand by and allow this minority to infiltrate our schools. God did put me here.
And Barbie says that triggered an investigation from the Florida Department of Education. Barbie showed CNN this letter she says is from the state saying, "This office has determined an investigation is warranted into allegations that you engaged in inappropriate conduct."
You must be Diazo. He talks about you all the time.
Not all the time.
Strange World features a gay character and may violate Florida's Parental Rights and Education Act, signed into law last year by Governor Ron DeSantis. The controversial bill bans certain instruction about sexual orientation and gender identity in classrooms. Hernando County Schools sent this announcement home to parents. While not the main plot of the movie, parts of the story involves a male character having and expressing feelings for another male character. In the future, this movie will not be shown. The school district confirmed to CNN the state is investigating Barbie. Rodriguez claimed Barbie broke school policy because she did not get the specific movie approved by school administration.
It is not a teacher's job to impose their beliefs upon a child. Religious, sexual orientation, gender identity, any of the above. But allowing movies such as this assist teachers in opening a door, and please hear me, they assist teachers in opening a door for conversations that have no place in our classrooms.
Barbie insists she did follow the rules, telling CNN every child had a previously signed permission slip from their parent, approving for PG movies to be shown in the classroom.
Nobody had a process in place where individual movies got approved. Now that I had this situation happen, there's a whole process in place where you have to get every single movie approved with a letter to admin, to the parent, to back.
Teachers who violate the Florida Parental Rights Bill can be suspended or have their teaching licenses revoked.
Right, before we go, the Acton Wellington District Commander, Inspector Dion Bennett, has released an update in a statement. In it, he says, "We understand this is a really traumatic time for the families and community involved." This is in relation to the Loafers Lodge fire. He says, "We are working tirelessly alongside our partners to support them through this process." He says, "The scene examination, investigation and work to identify those in the building will all take time. This is an extensive and methodical process, and we need to make sure that we get it right for the families, loved ones and our partner agencies in the community," Inspector Bennett says. And the police anticipate entering the building tomorrow once FENS releases the scene and an extensive health and safety risk assessment has been completed. The Chief Coroner has also offered her condolences to the families of the victims and says that the bodies are legally in the custody of the coroner. When they are transferred to the mortuary, they will be kept safely and respectfully, and they will do their best to bury those bodies or return them in keeping with the cultures of the whānau. She's saying it is a traumatic process, but they need to make sure of the identities of those who have been found. Fire and Emergency has confirmed 6 bodies found in that building, but they have been unable to search it in its entirety due to safety concerns. Now, ko te kaupapa tuatahi pōpō, tomorrow from 5 a.m, first up we'll be speaking to 4 residents of Loafers Lodge who share their harrowing stories of escape from the 3rd floor as fire engulfed the building. Thank you for joining us this evening. Do stay safe. Kei te hoki mai anō a pōpō whānau pō Mārie. We will see you again tomorrow, and do tune in for First Up at 5 a.m.